Get her off the stage." His voice echoed through the auditorium as he pointed at his wife. His mistress took her place. His family smiled. Then a senior executive dropped his phone, went pale, and rushed toward her, whispering something that made every smile in the room vanish at once. But hold that moment. Freeze it right there. The pointing finger, the pale executive, the whisper no one could hear. Because to understand how a man could do that to the woman who gave him everything, you have to go back. You have to see who they were before the lights, and you have to know the one secret she carried into that room, a secret even she did not fully understand yet. Her name was Zuri. She stood near the front of the auditorium in a plain navy dress. No jewelry, no designer shoes, just a small brass pin closed inside her hand. Around her, the room glowed. Giant screens lit the walls. Cameras moved on long arms above the crowd. 1,000 guests sat in soft blue light, holding their breath for the man on the stage. That man was her husband, Kwame. He looked like a king up there, tall, sharp suit, white smile. The screens behind him showed the company logo, glowing gold. Tonight, the company was launching its biggest product in years, and tonight, Kwame was being celebrated because the board had just promoted him to lead it all. His late father had built this empire from nothing, and now the son would wear the crown. The whole world watched him rise. But here is the thing the world did not know. That promotion had not been simple. The board could not lift Kwame to the top on their own. The company had one silent owner, a majority stake held quietly behind a wall of lawyers, and that owner's approval was required before Kwame could rise. A single signature. Without it, there was no crown. The board had received that signature weeks ago, and not one of them knew whose hand had signed it. Remember that. It will matter more than you can imagine. Zuri watched her husband shine. She clapped softly. She was proud in the quiet way she did everything. And for a moment, the old hope lit in her chest like a candle. Maybe tonight he will look at me the way he used to. Maybe tonight he will reach out his hand and call me up beside him, and the whole world will know I am his. Because there was a time he would have. Let me show you that Kwame, just for a breath, so you understand what was lost. Years ago, he was a different man, poor, hungry, kind. He met Zuri when they had nothing, two young people scraping by, and he fell for her the way you fall for warmth in winter. He married her in a tiny church with borrowed flowers, and he cried at the altar because he could not believe a woman that good had chosen him. He used to leave little notes in her coat pockets, silly ones, drawings of the two of them, old and gray. He gave her his coat on cold nights and walked home shivering, telling her he ran warm so she would not feel guilty. When his father looked down on him, when the world told him he was nothing, it was Zuri who held his face in her hands and said, "I see you, and I believe in you, and that is enough." For years, that was enough. So no, this is not a story about a man who was always a monster. It is sadder than that. It is a story about a good man who let power and a clever woman hollow him out from the inside, until the person who loved him first became the person he was most ashamed to be seen with. Keep your eye on him. Part of you will keep hoping he turns back. I will be honest with you now, so it hurts less later. That hope is the most painful part of all. Because the woman in the red dress on that stage had spent a year making sure he never would. Her name was Sloane. The crowd was told she was his executive partner, smart, polished, beautiful in a cold and careful way. But Sloane was not some accident he stumbled into in a weak moment. Sloane was the sharpest mind in that building, and she had set her eyes on Kwame the way a hunter sets eyes on a door left open. She did not chase him with passion. She chased him with strategy. She studied him for months before she ever touched him. She learned exactly what he feared, which was being seen as small, like his father always saw him. She learned exactly what he wanted, which was to feel like a great man. And she became the mirror that showed him only greatness until he could not stand to look anywhere else. And from the day she decided to have him, she understood one truth above all others. The wife had to go, not loudly, not in a way that left fingerprints. Sloane never threw a punch she could be blamed for. She arranged the room so the punch landed on its own. Then Kwame saw Zuri in the crowd. His face changed. The smile dropped for half a second. His jaw went tight. Sloane leaned to his ear and whispered, calm and slow, the way she always did. Whatever she said, it landed like a match on dry wood. Kwame lifted his hand. He pointed straight at his wife. "Get her off the stage," he said into the live microphone. The words rolled across the speakers. They filled every corner of the room. The screens were so large that her face appeared on them, 12 feet tall, frozen and shamed in front of everyone. Sloane walked forward, slow and certain, and took the empty place beside Kwame like a queen claiming a throne. His mother, Della, sat in the front row and smiled a small, satisfied smile. The kind that says, "You were never one of us." 3 blades in one breath: the husband, the mistress, the family. Zuri did not cry. She turned and began the long walk to the door. Whispers spread through the crowd like wind through dry grass. "The wife," someone said. "He just put his wife out in front of the whole world." A few people laughed, soft and cruel. A few looked away, ashamed for her. She passed row after row of strangers in fine clothes, and not one of them stood for her. She was alone in a room of 1,000 people, and that is the loneliest a person can ever be. But before she reached the door, a man in the front section stood up fast. Older, silver at the temples, a senior executive everyone in that building respected. His name was Walter. His phone slipped from his hand and clattered on the floor. He did not pick it up. His face had gone pale, almost gray. He pushed past his row, hurried up the aisle, reached Zuri, leaned to her ear, and whispered something. Nobody heard the words, but everybody saw the smiles begin to vanish. Zuri stopped walking. She looked down at the brass pin in her hand and closed her fingers around it. And for the first time in a long while, she did not feel like a ghost. We will come back to that whisper. I promise you. But first, you need to see how far she fell before she rose, because the climb only means something if you have walked through the dark with her. To understand Zuri, go back many years, to a small home on a poor street, where a girl learned the meaning of quiet strength. She grew up with her father, Samuel. Her mother had passed when she was small, so it was just the two of them. Samuel fixed machines for a living. Old radios, broken fans, engines other men had given up on. His hands were always stained with oil, but they were the gentlest hands she ever knew. They had little. Some weeks they ate beans 3 nights in a row, but Samuel never let his daughter feel poor. He told her stories until she fell asleep. He taught her to read the stars. And he taught her one lesson over and over until it lived in her bones. Real worth is quiet, he would say. You never beg people to see you. You build, child. You build quietly, and one day the work speaks for you. On the day she left home for the city, Samuel pressed something into her hand. A small brass pin he had made himself in his little workshop, carved with 2 words, "Build quietly." "When the world makes you feel small," he told her, "hold it, and remember who you are." She never let it go after that. Through every hard year, that little piece of brass stayed against her heart. And here is what Zuri did not fully know. Samuel had a best friend from his younger days, a poor dreamer named Elias. The two of them used to sit on a broken porch and sketch machines that did not exist yet, laughing at how the world would one day catch up to them. Life pulled them apart. Samuel stayed small and honest with his repair shop. Elias took one of those porch sketches and built it into a company. That company grew and grew until it became the gold logo glowing on those giant screens. Elias never forgot the friend who believed in him first, the man who fed him when he was starving and never once asked for a thing in return. And Samuel never asked. That was the kind of men they were. The bond between them ran deeper than money, deeper than years, deeper than anyone in that auditorium understood. Hold on to that too, like the pin, like the silent signature. These small threads are about to pull tight. Now come forward to the weeks after the launch, when a cracked marriage became a cruel one. Because the public shaming on that stage was not the end of Zuri's humiliation. It was only the beginning, and Sloane, patient and precise, made sure each blow landed harder than the last. The first blow came at a family dinner. Della hosted it, all crystal and candlelight. The whole family gathered to celebrate Kwame's promotion. Zuri spent the entire afternoon cooking, the way she always did, the way she had cooked for these people for 12 years. But when the guests arrived, Sloane arrived with them, on Kwame's arm, introduced to the aunts and cousins as the future of the family. And Zuri was not seated at the table. She was asked sweetly by Della to keep the food coming from the kitchen, to serve. So she served. In the home of the family she had married into, she carried plates to the woman sleeping with her husband, while that woman laughed at jokes Zuri could not hear. Halfway through the meal, Sloane lifted her empty glass without even turning her head and held it in the air and waited. The whole table fell quiet. Everyone understood the test. And Zuri, after a long moment, crossed the room and filled it. Sloane said thank you in a voice as smooth as glass and smiled into her wine. Because this was exactly the picture she had built, the wife as the servant, the mistress as the queen. She wanted the family to watch Zuri made small again and again, until small was the only way they could ever see her. A cousin, a young woman with a kind face, looked like she might say something. Sloane caught her eye across the table and held it, just long enough, and the cousin looked down at her plate and said nothing. That was the genius of Sloane. She did not need to silence the room with threats. She silenced it with a look and let everyone silence themselves. The second blow came at a public gala 2 weeks later. A grand charity night, cameras at the door, the whole city's powerful people gathered in one gleaming ballroom. Zuri came as Kwame's wife, in the one good dress she owned. But the moment they stepped inside, Kwame dropped her arm like something he was tired of carrying and walked straight to Sloane, who stood waiting in silver near the center of the room. All night, he introduced Sloane to investors and reporters as his partner, his right hand, the mind behind his rise. Zuri stood alone by a marble pillar, holding a drink she did not want, watching her husband build a brand new life 3 feet away from her and refuse, even once, to look back. A reporter finally drifted over to Zuri, sensing a story in the woman standing by herself. He asked politely who she was, and before Zuri could open her mouth, Sloane appeared at her side, as if from nowhere, smiling for the camera, and answered for her. "Oh, she helps the family," Sloane said lightly. "She has been with us for years. Very loyal." She made the wife sound like staff. The reporter nodded, wrote nothing, and moved on. And Zuri stood there, erased in a single sentence, by a woman who always knew exactly which sentence to choose. She wanted to call out the truth. "I am his wife. I have a name." But the words died in her throat because she looked across the room and saw Kwame laughing, and knew that even if she screamed it, he would not turn around. The third blow was the one that broke something deep. It happened in their bedroom, late after the gala. Zuri sat at the mirror taking off her earrings when Kwame came in. And for a moment, just a moment, the old Kwame surfaced. He stopped in the doorway and looked at her, really looked the way he used to. Something soft crossed his face, some memory of borrowed flowers and a tiny church. He opened his mouth like a man about to say, "Sorry." Zuri's heart leapt so hard it hurt. She thought, "There he is. There is my husband. He's still in there. Come back to me." But then his eyes fell to her hand, to the thin wedding band on her finger. The plain one he had bought her when they had nothing, a band so simple it had cost less than a single dinner at the places he ate now. She had worn it for 12 years. It had never left her finger. "Take that off," he said. The softness was gone, snuffed out like a candle. "It is embarrassing. It looks like something out of a charity box." Sloane noticed it tonight. She asked if my wife could not afford better, and I had no answer. "You walk around carrying my name and wearing a ring a beggar would refuse." He reached into his coat and pulled out a small velvet box, the kind that holds something expensive. And for one foolish, flaring instant, Zuri's breath caught, and she thought he remembered. He is making it right. But he did not hold it out to her. He set it down on the dresser for someone else, and said, without looking at her, "When you serve at the next event, wear gloves. I do not want that thing photographed next to me." Then he left. Zuri sat in front of the mirror and looked at her cheap little ring. The ring he had cried over when he slid it onto her finger in that tiny church. The ring that had once meant, "We have nothing in this world but each other, and each other is everything." She did not take it off. She closed one hand around it and the other around the brass pin, two small, worthless things that held all the worth she had left in the world, and for the first time in many months, she let herself break, quietly, into a folded towel, so that no one in that big, cold house would ever hear. And the cruelties kept piling on, like snow that would not stop. They changed the locks on his study and gave her no key. They quietly took her name off the family accounts. Sloane began leaving little things around the house, a scarf draped on a chair, a lipstick on the bathroom counter, marking territory the way an animal does. One morning, Zuri came downstairs and found another woman's coat hanging in the front hall, exactly where her own coat used to hang. And she found her own coat folded into a cardboard box by the back door, like something set out for the trash. She stood and looked at it for a long time. Then she carried the box upstairs and put her coat back in her closet and said nothing, because there was no longer anyone in that house who would listen. She stopped eating much. She stopped speaking unless spoken to. The light in her eyes went dim. There is a special kind of pain in being slowly forgotten by the very people you gave your whole self to. It does not scream. It just hollows you out, one quiet day at a time. And Sloane watched it happen with a calm and patient satisfaction, because a hollow woman does not fight back. A hollow woman signs whatever you put in front of her and disappears, which was exactly the move Sloane had planned next. Here is where the story turns, and turns again. So stay close, because nothing from here is what it seems. Sloane was clever, but cleverness has one weakness: it cannot rest. She had pushed Zuri down to nearly nothing, and still something itched at the back of her sharp mind. She had done her research, the way she always did, quietly digging into Zuri's past, her family, the people she came from. And she kept hitting one strange wall she could not climb. A name from long ago. A friendship, decades old, between a poor mechanic named Samuel and a man who had grown into a founder. On paper, it meant nothing. But Sloane's instincts, the very instincts that had carried her from nothing to the side of a powerful man, whispered a cold warning. This quiet, broken woman is tied to this company in some way I cannot see. Get her out, fully out, permanently, before whatever is buried in that history climbs up into the light. So Sloane made her play. She sat with Kwame one evening and laid it out for him like a strategy, which is the only language he still spoke. End the marriage, cleanly, quickly, before the promotion was fully locked in, before any messy claim could ever attach itself to his new fortune. A quiet divorce, a small payment, and Zuri would be gone from his life and his balance sheet forever. Sloane even drew up the papers herself, every line designed to give Zuri as little as the law would allow. Kwame brought the papers home, and for the second time in this story, the old Kwame flickered to life. He stood in the doorway with the documents in his hand, and he could not quite cross the room. He looked at Zuri sitting by the window in the fading light, smaller than he remembered, quieter than he remembered, and 12 years rose up in him all at once. A tiny church, borrowed flowers, a coat given away on a cold night. His voice, when it finally came, was almost gentle, almost his own again. "Zuri," he said, maybe we do not have to do it like this. Maybe there is still something here worth—" The phone in his pocket buzzed, a message from Sloane, who always seemed to know the exact moment his resolve might soften. He read it. Whatever it said, his face closed up again, hardened back into the stranger he had become. He set the papers down on the table between them. "Sign them," he said, cold once more. "By Friday." And the door shut behind him on the very last flicker of the man she had married. But Zuri did not sign. She looked at those papers for a long time as the room went dark around her, and something in her, some deep and stubborn voice that sounded exactly like her father, said, "Not yet." She did not know why. She had no plan, no power, no reason to hope. She only knew, bone deep, that she would not let these people write the ending of her story for her. She slid the papers into a drawer, unsigned, and closed it. It was the first time in over a year that she had said no to anything, and it felt, in the dark, like the first breath after a long time underwater. That same week, Walter came to her again. He came to the back door in the dark, the silver-haired executive who had dropped his phone on that stage and gone pale. He had watched the whole slow cruelty unfold from the inside, month after month, and he could not stomach it for one more day. He held out a sealed envelope, heavy and official, the paper thick and expensive in his trembling hand. "I have wanted to give you this for a very long time," he said quietly. "But there are people inside that company watching every move, And if this came out before the right moment, they would have found a way to bury it, and you with it. His eyes were wet in the porch light. Your father's old friend did not forget him. Before Elias died, he made arrangements, careful ones. What is inside this envelope changes everything, for you and for every person who has spent this past year trying to make you disappear. But you must trust me on the timing. Do not open it tonight. Do not breathe a single word to anyone. Come to the ceremony, the day they mean to hand Kwame the company, and let it happen there, in the open, in front of the cameras, where no lawyer and no scheme can make it vanish quietly. Can you wait that long? Zuri took the envelope. She could feel it almost humming in her hands, as if it were alive. Every part of her wanted to tear it open right there on the porch. But she looked into Walter's steady, frightened, hopeful eyes, and she thought of the silent signature no one could name, and the strange wall in her own history, and her father's voice carried on the cold air. Build quietly. I can wait, she said. And here is the bitter irony Sloane, for all her brilliance, could never see coming. While she schemed and raced to push Zuri out before the buried truth could surface, that truth was already written, already sealed, already resting against a quiet woman's heart, waiting only for the brightest stage in the world. They were not racing to bury Zuri. They were marching her, step by careful step, straight toward the moment she would rise above all of them. But Sloane was not finished, and neither were the twists. Della, snooping through the house as she so often did, found the divorce papers in the drawer, unsigned, and she found something else tucked beneath them, the edge of a strange, thick envelope. She did not know what it was, but she knew in her scheming bones that Zuri was hiding something, and she carried the news straight to Sloane. And for the first time since this all began, Sloane's careful calm cracked. Find out what is in that envelope, she said, low and sharp. Whatever it costs, now. For 3 days they searched the house, room by room, drawer by drawer. But Zuri had already moved it. She carried the envelope on her body now, against her heart, day and night. Beside the brass pin, the two of them tucked together over the same heartbeat. They tore the place apart and found nothing. And the not knowing began to eat at Sloane, who had built her entire life on always knowing everything before anyone else. For the first time, the hunter felt eyes on her own back and could not tell from where. One night, alone, Zuri finally broke the seal and read by lamplight. She read every word, slowly, and then again. And line by line, her tears stopped, her back straightened, her breathing slowed and deepened. What those pages held, I will tell you exactly when the moment comes, and not 1 second before, because some truths must be spoken out loud, in the open, in front of the very people who need to hear them. But I will tell you this much. When Zuri reached the last word, she set the brass pin down on top of the open letter, and the 2 carved words caught the lamplight. Build quietly. And for the first time in her whole life, she understood exactly what her father had been trying to give her. Something inside her woke up, and it would not go back to sleep. The company planned a second great event, the official ceremony to hand Kwame full and final control of the empire, press from every channel, investors from every city, the entire board, cameras carrying it live to the world. Kwame prepared like a man being crowned, a new suit, a new watch heavy on his wrist, Sloane on his arm in a gown the color of victory, Della in the front row in her pearls, the mistress, the family, the husband, all glowing in the lights, all reaching out their hands to take everything. Sloane had pushed hard for this day to come fast, desperate to lock it all into place before the thing she could not see came into view. She did not know, could not know, that in her rush she had built the perfect stage for her own ending. The ceremony began. Speeches rolled out, one after another, praising the young leader and the bright future. Then Kwame himself took the stage to accept his throne. The screens lit gold behind him. He smiled out at the crowd, the whole world at his feet. Then the doors at the back of the auditorium opened, and Zuri walked in, but not the Zuri they knew. This woman moved slow and sure. She wore a deep, simple gown, elegant and quiet. No loud colors, no shouting for attention. On her collar, small and bright, sat the brass pin. Her chin was level. Her eyes were calm. She did not look like a ghost. She looked like a force that had finally decided to be seen. The whole room turned to watch her come down the aisle. The same room that had laughed at her weeks before. The same giant screens that had once held her shamed and frozen face now caught her steady, unhurried one. She did not rush. She did not look down. Every single step was a sentence, and every sentence said the same thing. I am still here. You did not break me. You only made me ready. A hush rolled out ahead of her like a rising tide, swallowing the music, swallowing the applause. And up on the stage, Sloane felt it at last, the cold she had been dreading for weeks, crawling slowly up her spine. Kwame saw his wife, and his face twisted with disbelief and anger. "Oh, not again," he said into the microphone, loud enough for the cameras. He waved his hand at the guards by the wall. "Somebody remove her. She does not belong here. She never has." But before the guards could take a single step, a voice rang out across the auditorium. "Stop!" It was Walter. He rose from his seat in the front row, and that one word from that one respected old man carried more weight than every speech Kwame had ever given. The guards froze where they stood. The room went still. Walter walked to the stage, took the microphone from a stunned young assistant, and turned to face the 1,000 waiting faces. He looked at Kwame. He looked at Sloane in her gown of victory. He looked at Della in her pearls. And then, calm and clear and unafraid, he spoke the truth that had been waiting in a sealed envelope against a quiet woman's heart. "This company," Walter said, "was never this young man's to inherit." A murmur ran through the room like a current. "Before our founder died," Walter continued, "he changed everything. He sat in his office with his lawyers, weak and dying, but with a steady hand, and he restructured the ownership of this entire company. Every share, every vote, the controlling stake, the silent majority that sits quietly above this very board, he gave it all to one person, the daughter of the only true friend he ever had in this world, the poor, honest man who fed him when he was starving, who believed in him before the money, before the fame, before any of you had ever heard his name." Walter turned and he looked at Zuri, and his voice softened almost to breaking. He left all of it to her, to Zuri. She has owned this company, quietly, the entire time. Every door each of you walked through to get into this room tonight, you walked through because she allowed it. The room did not gasp on cue. It did something far stranger and far heavier. It turned. Head after head, slow and disbelieving, swiveling toward the woman in the simple gown standing in the aisle. The woman they had watched dragged off a stage. The woman they had watched serve dinners and stand alone by pillars. And then Walter delivered the blow that took the very air out of Kwame's lungs. "And that promotion," Walter said, quieter now, every word landing like a stone in still water. "The crown you are standing up there to accept tonight. The board could never have granted it to you on their own. By the founder's own design, it required the approval of the majority owner. One signature. Some of you in this room wondered, these past weeks, whose hand could possibly have signed it." He paused, and the silence stretched until it ached. "Hers. She signed it. The woman you dragged off your stage. The woman you forced to serve your family's dinners. The woman whose wedding ring you called an embarrassment and told to wear gloves. She is the only reason you were ever permitted to stand on that stage at all. Kwame, your wife handed you your crown with her own pen, and the very night she did it, you used that crown to humiliate her in front of the entire world." The silence that followed was total and absolute. Kwame's face came apart in pieces, slow, like something collapsing underwater. "That is not true," he whispered, but there was no strength left in it. He was already looking at Zuri, and he could see in her calm and steady eyes that every single word was true. The empire he believed he had conquered, she had owned the whole time. The promotion he had worn like armor she had handed to him with her own hand. Every cruelty, every insult, every plate she had carried to another woman, she had done it all while holding the quiet power to erase him with a word, and she had never once used it. She had only waited and hoped, and kept on loving a man who had stopped deserving it a long, long time ago. Sloane took one step back from Kwame, only one. But every eye in the room saw it. The future she had hunted and schemed for over an entire year turned to gray smoke in a single sentence. Her brilliant mind raced for an angle, a counter, any thread left to pull, and for the very first time in her life it came back to her empty. There was nothing left to win. The board, the press, the family, the man, all of it gone in the time it took an old man to tell the truth. And Della's small, satisfied smile died on her face. The cold woman in her pearls suddenly looked very small and very old and very alone. Zuri walked forward, slow, calm. She climbed the steps to the very stage they had thrown her from, and she took the microphone from Walter's hand. The whole world braced for her to scream, to curse them, to finally let loose the rage of a year of cruelty and burn every one of them to the ground. She did not. She looked out at the room for a moment. Then she looked at Kwame, the man she had loved for 12 years, and she spoke softly, so softly that the 1,000 people had to lean in to catch it. "My father told me real worth is quiet," she said. "He told me to build quietly, and one day the work would speak for me." She paused. Tonight, it spoke. She reached up, took the small brass pin from her collar, and set it gently down on the podium, a piece of plain carved metal from a poor man's hands, now resting at the very center of a billion-dollar empire. "This is from my father. He had nothing in this world, and he gave me everything that ever mattered. You had everything, and you threw away the only thing that did." Then she stepped back from the microphone, and the silence in that room was the loudest sound any of them had ever heard in their lives. Kwame reached out for her arm as she turned to go, the very same way he had reached for her on the launch stage when he dragged her down. But this time, when she simply looked at his hand, he let go on his own. He had no power left to hold her, and every person in that room could see it plainly. The man who once pointed and said, "Get her off the stage," could not even hold his own wife's arm. The cameras caught all of it. By morning, the whole world would know. They would watch the footage again and again, and send it to their sisters and their mothers and their daughters. And they would say, "Look, look what she did. Look how she stood." After that night, the fall came fast, and it came hard, and it did not stop coming. The board met within days and removed Kwame from his title entirely. The crown he had worn for a few short weeks was lifted off his head, and underneath it there was nothing at all, because there had never been anything but his father's name and his wife's silent grace. And now both were gone. The man who had pointed at his wife and said, "Get her off the stage," now stood on no stage anywhere. Sloane vanished first, exactly as a woman like Sloane always does. She had never wanted Kwame the man. She had wanted the empire, the lights, the name, the victory. The moment she truly understood there was nothing left to take from him, she was simply gone. He called her 100 times. The number stopped working. He drove to the places they used to be seen together, and she was always somewhere else, on the arm of some other man with a title and a future. He learned, far too late, the oldest lesson there is. A woman who comes only for your power leaves the very second the power is gone. But Sloane, for once, did not slip away clean. Walter had been keeping records all along, careful and quiet, dates and names and the cruel things said when she thought no one was listening. The whole patient campaign to push out the company's true owner. When it came to light, Sloane found that every door in her entire industry had closed softly against her. Her name, once feared in every boardroom in the city, became a name no one would return a call for. The hunter spent her years after hunting work that would never come, undone at last by the one thing she had never accounted for, her own ruthlessness, written down by someone who waited. Della faced her own reckoning, the plotting, the scheming, the long campaign to push Zuri out before the inheritance could settle. All of it came to light, every word of it documented. One afternoon, weeks later, she came to the company headquarters in her very finest coat, with soft, apologetic words rehearsed in the car on the way over, and she asked at the desk to see Zuri. The assistant met her with a polite and gentle smile and explained that there was no appointment available. Not that day, not the next, not any day. Della stood there in that bright marble lobby beneath the gold logo she had schemed so hard and so long to own, and she finally understood, all the way down, that the quiet girl she had spent years looking down upon now held the entire sky over her head. She turned and she walked out, and the heavy glass doors closed behind her with a soft and final click that sounded, to her, like the closing of a life. And then there was Kwame, who suffered the slowest fall of all of them, because Kwame alone could remember what he had once had. Old friends drifted away from him like water running downhill, never to be seen again. The investors who had clasped his hand now looked straight through him. The colleagues who had laughed at all his jokes found other, better tables. The phone that had once rung from morning to night went silent and stayed silent. The big house felt enormous and empty around him, every room holding the faint echo of a woman he had trained himself, day by day, not to see. He would lie awake in the dark and remember the silly notes he used to tuck into her coat pockets, the coat he gave away on cold nights, the way he had wept at a tiny altar because he could not believe his own luck. And then, helpless, he would remember her face up on those giant screens, 12 feet tall and frozen in shame because of him. The cruelest punishment of all was not losing the company, or the title, or the money. It was being a man finally clear-eyed enough to see with perfect and unbearable clarity, exactly what he had thrown away, and exactly when, and exactly how. One evening he came to her, at the headquarters that was now truly and fully hers. He looked older, smaller. His fine suit hung loose on a frame that grief had thinned. He did not come for the company, he came for her. "Please," he said, and his voice broke on the word. "I made mistakes, terrible ones, unforgivable ones, I know that now. But I see you, Zuri. Finally, I see everything. 12 years has to count for something. Let me try, just let me try to make it right." Zuri looked at him for a long, quiet moment. She did not raise her voice. She did not throw a single one of his cruelties back into his face, though she held enough of them to bury him. She looked at him the way you look at a stranger who has knocked, by mistake, on the wrong door. "You did not see me when I was the woman who loved you," she said quietly. "You only see me now that the whole world has stood up and told you who I am." She shook her head, slow and certain, and without anger. "I waited so long for you to come back to me, Kwame. I kept hoping, even when you made me serve, even when you mocked the ring you cried over. The woman who would have forgiven you absolutely anything, she stood right in front of you for years, and you looked straight through her every single day. She is gone now. You did not lose her on that stage. You lost her one small cruelty at a time, and the worst of it is, you never even noticed she was leaving." "I gave you 12 years, he whispered. "No," she said, softer than ever. "I gave them. You only took them. You are just now learning that there is a difference." He had no answer for that. There was none to be had. He stood there in the doorway of an office that would never be his, with his loose suit and his 2 empty hands, and he wept, openly, for a love he had set out by the back door like an old coat in a cardboard box. And Zuri did not weep with him. She had done all of her weeping in the dark, alone, folded into a towel so no one would hear, many long months ago, when there had been no cameras and no crowd, and not one single person willing to stand for her. Her tears had all been spent on a man who never came. She would not spend them again now, when it cost him so little and her so much. She rose from behind her desk and walked past him to the door, and she walked out with the very same quiet dignity she had carried the night they dragged her off the stage. Except this time, the whole world watched her leave on her own 2 feet, head high by her own free choice. She did not destroy Kwame. She never lifted a hand to do it. She simply, finally, stopped holding him up. And a man with nothing of his own can only stand on borrowed worth for so long before he falls. That was the whole of her revenge, and it was the rare and quiet kind that leaves your own 2 hands perfectly clean. Time passed, the way it always does, and slowly the storm gave way to something soft and green. Zuri did not let her power turn her cruel. She did not let it turn her cold. She remembered every single day exactly where she had come from. She went back to her father's old neighborhood, to the poor street with the small leaning homes, and she stood for a long while in front of the little workshop where Samuel had once fixed broken machines for people who could never quite pay him. She bought the whole block, not to tear it down and build something shining, to lift it up. She built a center there, in her father's name, where young people could learn a trade, where old men could repair engines with their hands and be paid fairly for it, where children who ate beans 3 nights a week could sit and dream as big as 2 poor friends once dreamed on a broken porch. She gave away more than most people will ever see in a lifetime, and never once as a show, always in the quiet way her father had taught her with his oil-stained hands. The fortune that had come to her in silence became, in her care, a fortune that lifted hundreds of others, and that, you should know, is the rarest kind of wealth there has ever been. She ran the company well, too. Far better than anyone had ever expected of the quiet woman they once laughed at. She turned out to be the steadiest hand the empire had ever known. She listened far more than she spoke. She kept every promise she made. Walter stayed faithfully at her side as her right hand, just as he had once stood beside the founder, and together the two of them rebuilt what a year of greed had cracked and stained. They paid their people fairly. They opened doors that had been kept shut for far too long. And the company grew, not just larger, but kinder. And somehow, against all the wisdom of the boardroom, it grew richer for it too. There were still hard nights. Nights when the loneliness pressed in close. When she grieved the man she had once believed she married, even knowing now that he had never truly existed at all. Healing is not a straight and rising road, but on those nights, she would walk the long, quiet halls of the building that held her father's friend's impossible dream, and the truth would settle a little deeper into her bones. She had not lost. She had been set free. In her office, on a clean desk beside a tall window that looked out over the whole city, she kept just two things: a photograph of her father in his oil-stained shirt, smiling his gentle, patient smile, and resting against the frame the small brass pin. Build quietly. Sometimes, late in the evening, when the lights of the city came on one by one below her, she would pick up that little pin and hold it in her palm, the way she had held it through all the long, dark nights. And she would feel her father standing near, and she would think of just how far the quiet road had carried her. From a poor man's porch to the very top of an empire, not by shouting, not by begging to be seen, not by revenge, but simply by holding on with both hands to who she truly was. On the very nights the whole world swore to her that she was nothing. The ones who underestimated her silence were the ones most shattered by her strength. Some people lose everything and discover who they truly are. Zuri lost a husband, a family, and the life she thought was hers. But in the end, she gained something far more valuable: her own worth. The people who underestimated her silence were the ones most shocked by her strength. If this story moved you, let me know in the comments. Should Zuri have forgiven Kwame, or was walking away her greatest victory? Don't forget to like, follow, and join me for the next story.